took 9 years before but I began to play the nightclubs in and around Southern California.
For decades, Dwight Yoakam has been a mystery wrapped in a cowboy hat, the voice of pure country soul, and the swagger of a man who never quite fit into Nashville's mold. His songs carried heartbreak, grit, and rebellion, but behind those mirrored shades there was always something more, something he never talked about. From his breakout success in the 1980s to his surprising turns as a Hollywood actor, Yoakam lived a life of relentless reinvention. He wasn't just a singer. He was a storyteller, an icon who blended honky-tonk with rock and roll, country with cinematic flair. But as his fame grew, so did the whispers about his relationships, his feuds with country legends, and the one secret that fans couldn't stop speculating about. Now, at 68, Dwight Yoakam has finally decided to set the record straight. In a rare and emotional revelation, he broke his silence on the rumors that have followed him for most of his life. Not for attention, but for truth. The world that once defined him by mystery is now seeing a man ready to embrace honesty, legacy, and redemption. This is the story of Dwight Yoakam, the man who changed country music forever, and the truth he's been carrying for decades. Before he was a Grammy-winning artist and cultural icon, Dwight Yoakam was just a kid from Pikeville, Kentucky, a restless dreamer growing up in the shadow of coal mines and country music radio. He wasn't born into fame. He earned every note of it through sheer determination, grit, and a refusal to sound like anyone else. When he arrived in Los Angeles in the late 1970s, country music wasn't exactly welcome there. The urban cowboy trend was taking over Nashville, and most record labels thought Yoakam's sound was too raw, too twangy, too hillbilly. But that's exactly what made him special. He fused the Bakersfield sound of Buck Owens and Merle Haggard with the rebellious edge of punk, performing in the same clubs where rock bands like X and the Blasters were making noise. And then, out of nowhere, it happened. His debut album, Guitars, Cadillacs, etc., etc., exploded in 1986, instantly redefining what country music could sound like. His voice was pure heartbreak, sharp, soulful, and unmistakably his own. Songs like Honky Tonk Man and It Won't Hurt made him a sensation. But with fame came the shadows. The rumors that began swirling as quickly as his record sales climbed. People whispered about his perfectionism, his temper, his love life. Some said he was impossible to work with. Others swore he was just misunderstood. There were questions about his private relationships, why he avoided public appearances with partners, and whether the pain in his lyrics came from a real-life heartbreak he refused to name. In interviews, Dwight always danced around the topic. He'd smile politely, tilt his hat down, and redirect the conversation. "I write what I feel," he once told a journalist, "and sometimes what I feel is none of your business." That mysterious edge only fueled curiosity. Fans couldn't tell where the performer ended and the man began. Behind the scenes, though, Dwight was consumed by the demands of his career. He toured relentlessly, often performing over 200 shows a year. His band members described him as both a genius and a perfectionist, someone who demanded excellence because he believed country music deserved it. Dwight didn't want to be a star, one of them recalled. He wanted to be a legend. But legends come with rumors. And for Yoakam, they began to take a toll. Gossip magazines linked him to actresses and fellow musicians, stories he never confirmed nor denied. Some claimed he had secret relationships that ended badly. Others suggested there were deeper reasons behind his reclusive tendencies. For a man who sang about love, Dwight seemed determined to hide his own. By the early 1990s, his fame had reached new heights, and so had the speculation. His on-screen roles in films like Sling Blade and Panic Room added to his mystique, portraying quiet, complex characters that mirrored the man behind the hat. Fans wondered if Dwight Yoakam's greatest performance was Dwight Yoakam himself. He wasn't ready to reveal the truth then. But the foundation of the rumors, the heartbreak, the pain, the loss, had already begun shaping not just his career, but his legacy. What no one knew at the time was that beneath the cowboy charm and chart-topping success, Dwight was fighting private battles that would haunt him for years. The question wasn't if the rumors were true. The question was which ones were. By the early 2000s, Dwight Yoakam had lived through nearly 2 decades of fame, and for every hit song, there was a rumor that followed him. Some whispered about his broken relationships, others about emotional wounds that never healed. But the truth was simpler and sadder. Dwight Yoakam was tired. The world saw a man with everything: gold records, awards, and a respected acting career. Yet those closest to him saw someone quietly crumbling under the pressure of perfection. He had spent so long protecting his image, his art, and his privacy that he'd built a wall too high for anyone to climb. Behind the music videos and sold-out tours was a man who often sat alone in dressing rooms, writing lyrics he'd never release. He started canceling interviews, skipping after-parties, and disappearing for long stretches between projects. When he did appear, fans noticed the change. His trademark smile had dimmed, and his eyes carried a weight that couldn't be hidden by a cowboy hat. "Dwight's been running from something," one close friend said. But when you run long enough, eventually it catches up. Rumors of health issues began to circulate, followed by speculation about heartbreak. Insiders spoke of a relationship that ended abruptly, someone he had cared for deeply, who couldn't live in the shadows anymore. Dwight never confirmed it, but those who knew him said that was the moment his songs grew darker, lonelier. Tracks like 1,000 Miles from Nowhere suddenly sounded less like performance and more like confession. For years, he avoided addressing any of it. He'd say, "The songs speak for me," and that was that. But inside, the silence was becoming unbearable. Fame had given him everything he ever wanted and taken everything else away. When Dwight turned 60, something shifted. He started talking more about life, loss, and legacy. In one rare interview, he said softly, "You can't keep carrying ghosts forever. Eventually, they start carrying you." Fans didn't understand it at the time, but it was the first crack in his armor, the first sign that he was ready to stop hiding. Then came a health scare that changed everything. During a tour rehearsal, Dwight reportedly collapsed from exhaustion. Doctors ordered him to rest, and for the first time in decades, he had to stop moving. That silence, the one he'd spent a lifetime avoiding, became impossible to escape. Friends say that during his recovery, Dwight started revisiting his old journals and letters. There, buried in years of handwritten lyrics, were fragments of truth he'd never shared. Notes about his struggles with loneliness, heartbreak, and the fear of being misunderstood. He wasn't hiding something scandalous, a longtime collaborator revealed. He was hiding his pain. He didn't want to be pitied. When he finally began to open up publicly, fans were stunned. In a heartfelt interview, Dwight admitted that much of the speculation about his secret heartbreak was rooted in truth. "I lost people I loved because I didn't know how to let them in," he said. "The road, the music, the fame, it all became a shield. I thought I was protecting myself, but really I was just disappearing." That confession marked the turning point. For a man who had built his legend on silence, speaking that truth was the bravest thing he could do. The rumors, it turned out, were never about scandal. They were about sorrow. And now, for the first time, Dwight Yoakam wasn't just singing about heartbreak. He was living through it, and finally, learning to heal. When Dwight Yoakam turned 68, something about him had changed. The fire in his music was still there, sharp, soulful, and timeless. But the walls he had spent a lifetime building had begun to crumble. For decades, his name had been tied to mystery, speculation, and 1,000 unspoken questions. Fans had always wondered what he was hiding behind that crooked smile and those mirrored shades. And finally, after nearly half a century of silence, he decided it was time to tell the truth. He did it not on a talk show or a red carpet, but in a quiet, heartfelt sit-down interview, a rare appearance where the cameras felt secondary to the moment itself. Dressed simply in a denim jacket and his signature hat, Dwight spoke not as a country legend, but as a man who had seen and lost nearly everything fame could offer. "The rumors," he began, his voice steady but soft, "weren't about scandal. They were about survival. He explained that much of what the public had speculated for years, about his solitude, his distance, his heartbreak, all came from a simple truth. Dwight Yoakam had lived most of his life afraid to be vulnerable. He confirmed that he'd experienced deep loss, relationships that fell apart because of his obsession with perfection, friendships strained by fame, and the guilt of years spent on the road chasing an ideal that never existed. "I was terrified," he said. "Terrified of being ordinary. Terrified of being forgotten. And somewhere in all that fear, I stopped letting people in. But the revelation that stunned fans most wasn't about love or loss. It was about regret." Dwight admitted that he had spent years running from his own emotions, writing about pain instead of confronting it. The very music that made him famous had also become his hiding place. "I used my songs as a shield," he confessed. "Every time I sang about heartbreak, I was really just talking to myself." In that moment, the rumors everyone had speculated about, secret love affairs, feuds, breakdowns, suddenly seemed irrelevant. The truth was far more human. Dwight Yoakam wasn't revealing some scandalous secret. He was revealing himself. The man who once seemed untouchable was finally allowing the world to see that even legends bleed quietly. As he continued, he reflected on how age had brought him peace. The fame that once consumed him no longer mattered. What mattered now were the people who stuck by him, the songs that still spoke truth, and the fans who had grown old listening to him. "If I've learned anything," he said with a soft smile, "it's that the rumors stop mattering the moment you start being honest." In the months that followed, Dwight began performing again, not to chase charts, but to reconnect. His concerts felt different now. He spoke more between songs, laughed more with the crowd, and seemed genuinely at ease. Fans said it was like watching a man who had finally laid his ghosts to rest. Those who had followed him since the early days could sense it. The fire in his eyes wasn't just about music anymore. It was about redemption. The cowboy who once hid behind mystery was finally comfortable standing in his own truth. When asked if he regretted waiting this long to open up, Dwight just smiled. "Timing," he said, "is the rhythm of life. You can't rush it. You just have to find your beat again." And so, at 68, Dwight Yoakam didn't just confirm the rumors, he transcended them. In doing so, he reminded the world that the strongest men aren't the ones who hide behind toughness or fame, but the ones who finally find the courage to be seen.